Well, hello and welcome in to the New Normal podcast. My name is Ryan, and I am a youth pastor here in the Northern Virginia area. And today I have one of my students with me, Lauren.
Hi.
And I will admit, this is the second time we're filming this episode. Lauren did such a good job the first time we filmed it, and I went to edit the footage, and it was blurry. So if you're watching this, we got it right this time. But we're so excited that you're joining us today as we dive into the topic of how to honor God with academics. And so we know if you're in middle or high school watching this, school is a big part of your life. It's what you spend the most time doing. And so we were talking about how do we honor God with that. Maybe you're, at a point where you feel stressed out because of school, then this is for you. Maybe you're at a point where you don't have any motivation for school, then this episode is for you as well. We're going to dive into both ends of that. But as always, the New Normal podcast just exists to equip, train, and encourage middle and high school students to live for Christ and to share his message of hope with those around them. And so we hope today's an encouragement to you as we dive into today's episode. All right, now, Lauren, I've already gotten to hear your story once, but I've also gotten to just watch your story play out. And one of the things that we love is just allowing students to share what God's been doing in their life. We know some students, maybe they might have just trusted Christ a few weeks ago. Some of us trusted Christ at a really young age, and maybe some of our listeners too, are on one end of those extremes. But we always love to just hear what God is doing in each of our lives, because he's painting a unique story for each of us. He calls us to one big story for all of us to join in on, but he calls each of us to a unique story that he has for each of us. So fill us in a little bit on what your story is. What was life like before Christ, if you remember it? When did you make that decision to trust in Christ? You understood that you needed a Savior, and how's he been working in your life since?
So I trusted Christ at a very young age. I was born into a Christian household, so there was definitely a lot of praying and going to church in our house. And I didn't accept Christ until I was in first grade in VBS. It was then that I realized, one day we were talking about salvation and what Christ did for me and why he died for me. And there was something about it, and I know it was God sending his message to me to just accept Christ. And so I accepted Christ then, and it's just been a wonderful thing. After I accepted Christ, I just felt this overwhelming feeling of being at peace and just joy. And I know it was the Holy Spirit just working in my heart, and it was a wonderful day. I'll never forget it. Yeah.
So first grade it wasn't as long ago as it was when I was in first grade, but a lot of life has happened since then. So, what have maybe you've learned? 'Cause it's not always good days. Sometimes there's bad days. So there's ups and downs, but what has God taught you throughout all of that? Like, what are some things that maybe he's still showing you, or some cool things that you can point to and be like, I can't explain that any other way than God? What's he been doing in your life since you decided to trust in him?
So there was a time about a year or so ago, I was dealing with really bad anxiety, and it just made it really hard. And it was then that I kind of came back to him and said, God, I cannot do this on my own. I need your help, because otherwise, without your help, I can never make it through this. And so I learned to just, give everything to him. Every time I felt overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, I would always pray to him. And almost immediately after every time that I prayed to him, I just felt at peace. I felt him just calming my heart and saying that everything's going to be okay. And after that, I had a lot more sound state of mind, and things got easier for me. Maybe not always for the better, but I knew that they would equate to something in the long run. And that is something that, when I'm looking back on now, it is such a cool thing to see. And every day is just a building process with him.
Yeah. Yeah, so that idea of, like you mentioned, you continually had to go back to God and give it to him. So it's, there's one moment of salvation, and God is with us forever. We can never do anything to cancel that out, right? Because it's not about what we've done, it's about what he's done for us when we trust in him. But this idea that it's not just I trust in him and then I just go and do my own thing, right? Like he wants to continually talk to us, and so we should continually come back to him. So it's really cool. Really, really appreciate you sharing what God has been doing in your life. And so as we dive into this idea of honoring God with academics, right?
Yeah.
Again, as I mentioned in the opening, some people might be like, I am so stressed over schoolwork. Like I'm struggling. I'm stressing about what school is, or what college am I going to go to, or are my grades good enough? All sorts of things. But we also have some people who might be like, I just have no motivation. I don't like school. School isn't for me. So we've kind of got opposite end of the spectrum, right? So why pick this topic? Maybe share a little bit about where you're at with this, but why pick this topic? Out of all the topics we could talk about, how God and school come together and what that looks like?
So school is definitely a big part of teenagers' lives nowadays, especially when you are upperclassmen in high school and there's a lot more decisions you have to make. For me personally, I look at all my friends, I look at what they're doing, and a lot of them tend to be doing like all these APs and all these DEs, and they seem to be passing them with these flying colors and with seemingly no stress or frustration. And then there's me taking 2 APs, and it's kind of stressful from that. So I really do think that kind of we as a society kind of place this emphasis on always doing the best classes, even if it's not necessarily something that you want to do or pursue for your long-term career. It's definitely something that is placed on the shoulders of teenagers collectively. They're always pushing us to do the best, because if you do the best, you're going to go into the best college, and you're going to be successful in everything that you do in your life. You're going to have the best car, the best house, all this money, and that's not the case for everyone. And I think that's the biggest misconception, is it's not meant for everyone.
Yeah. And yeah, I talk to a lot of students who are like, I hate school.
Yeah.
And our society's decided it's important enough that no matter if you hate it or love it, if you're one of those people who love school, there were days I enjoyed school. But our society has said, look, this is something we're going to do. So everybody's in this boat together. Yeah. And so people might be coming from all different walks of life. And you mentioned AP and DE, advanced placement, dual enrollment. There's all sorts. I mean, if you're in high school, there's so many classes you can take. If you're in private school, or if you're in homeschool, there's online programs, and there's all different sorts of things. So this ranges so much. But yeah, I love this topic as to what you said. School has kind of become an idol in our culture.
Right.
Especially where we live in Northern Virginia.
Absolutely.
Because so many people who live here have achieved so much in their career. And so there's such an emphasis placed on education. And yeah, just like you said, like, hey, if you get good grades, you'll get into a good school. If you get into a good school, then you'll get a good job. If you get a good job, then you'll have a good house. Then you'll be happy and you won't need to worry about anything. But the problem is, it doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
Like even if I, all those things line up for me, there's still going to be something inside of me that's like, is this it? Because guess what? It never ends. So then you get a good job and you have a good salary. Well, then you want to buy the nice car. You want to buy that next thing that you want. You want to provide for your family. So you start working harder and harder and harder. And you lose it. You lose the whole point.
Absolutely.
But what's interesting is, God created us to be learners. God created us to work. So there is good in this, and it's just about how do we find that. So we've talked on it a little bit, but maybe go back and kind of a little bit deeper. And in your opinion, how have we as a culture kind of tied your identity or your worth to your ability to achieve academically, or maybe even speak a little bit more to how that's played out in your life personally?
So I'm definitely getting pushed to do all these advanced classes that I know aren't going to benefit me in my future. And I always say to those people that do push me, it's not something that I am interested in. I'm not going to pursue it later on in my life. So therefore, it doesn't have any relevance to me. I'm only going to focus on the things that I know will possibly boost me in my future, and that's it. And, there are a lot of kids, a lot of my friends personally, that have been caught up in this cycle of they need to do all this in order to be successful, even if it's not the thing that they intend to do in their life. And we see that a lot from school officials and even those that want to help us get into college. There is definitely this thing amongst those who are always trying to push students to do their best. That is like their rhetoric.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Like what you said, I remember a story So I loved history, and you and I have this in common. We're history nerds. I was a sophomore in high school, and when you're a sophomore, I don't know if it's still the same way, but it's kind of the one AP you can take as like a sophomore is world history.
Yeah.
And so, I was like, I'm going to take this world history class. And I remember we started out with 32 kids in the class, and one by one, everybody dropped.
Oh yeah.
And it was an insane amount of work. It was like 2-3 hours a night.
Mm-hmm.
And we finished with 18. And I remember I was the only student who got an A in the class. Well, you say that, just wait. But we went to take, this was ACE. It was Cambridge. It wasn't AP, but we went to take the exam, which you have to pass the exam in order for any of this to mean anything to get college credit, right?
Yes.
And I remember I got the exam and I was so exhausted. I just looked at it and I just blanked. And I remember I just doodled on the page because we had to write 5 essays in 3 hours.
Oh, Lord.
And I was like, I was so burnt out. I was so exhausted. And I was like, almost a realization of like, what am I doing? Like, this doesn't really, like, it's good. But I'm killing myself for what,
Right.
And so actually on the ACE exam there, you can get an A, a B, a C, a D, an E, an F, and a U. And I got a U, which means ungraded, which means they look at it and they don't even grade it.
Oh my
because you didn't even do anything. And so that was kind of the realization for me. It's like, why did I put in all this work for what? For nothing. And I love history, but I hated this, and this wasn't for me. And so I've personally lived that, but I think the people are becoming disenfranchised with the American dream that people are selling. I think your generation specifically is the one who are kind of being like, look, this isn't for everybody. It's for some people, right? College is a great thing if that's what you want to pursue, and it can be a means to an end. But we have people who are like, yeah, you don't know what you want to do? Go to college. Go tens and thousands of dollars of debt, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, just to figure out what you want to do. And it's like, hold on, time out. There's got to be a better way. Like,
Exactly.
it's just like, I wouldn't tell my son, be like, hey, Dad, I don't know if I want to buy this house. It's like, no, just buy it and live in it, and then you'll decide if you want. It's like, no, you're making decisions that impact you for the rest of your life. And so your generation has kind of been the one who's, thankfully, in my opinion, wised up to this, to be like, not everybody has to pursue this same path. Like, there are trades, there's community college, there are 4-year universities, but you need to pick what God is calling you to do.
Right.
And I think we fall into the trap of what Jesus tells us not to do in Matthew 6, where he says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so we want to work hard. We want to do our best in school. If you're like, I don't have any motivation, pray and ask God to give you motivation, because we need to work hard in schoolwork, right? But we also need to realize that God has created each of us differently. And so I shouldn't be pressured to pursue something that I don't feel God calling me to,
Right.
or God has not gifted me in. If I want to be a nurse, then what am I doing taking, AP Lit? Like, if you want to and you enjoy it and it's beneficial for you, then go for it, right? But we can't all fall into the same pattern, the same mold. And actually what's interesting, guys specifically are rejecting this idea. College enrollment is actually becoming much more heavily female, because think about this. Now that I have a son, hey, go to school and sit still for 7 hours a day and listen. Who does that benefit more? Like, who is more likely designed to succeed in that? Well, girls, right? Because they're better at sitting still. They're better at listening. Guys, we're not. It's just not for us, right? And some guys might thrive in that again. But my point is simply to say, it's not God has created each of us uniquely and gifted us uniquely. And so we need to ask God and say, God, what do you want me to do? God, do you want me to go to college? God, do I have a desire for this career or that career? How have you gifted me? And just guess what? Go start living for Christ, and he'll get you where he wants you. He'll show you what I'm doing now is not what I went to school for.
Yeah.
Right. But I've seen how God used what I did learn in college in my job now, which is something completely different. Right. God still used it. But I just started pursuing something I was passionate about. And along the way, God said, hey, I got something for you over here. Why don't you check this out? And so if we also can be paralyzed, but like, what am I going to major in? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go to college? And it's like, no. Pursue something that you have a passion for that is God honoring, and he'll get you where he wants you. So how does this play out actively, like in a daily life of a high schooler or a middle schooler, what does this actually look like to honor God with our academics, to honor God with our schoolwork? How does that actually play out on a practical daily basis?
So I definitely start off my day with praying. Praying is by far the best way to go in terms of just honoring God. I find myself, no matter if it's before a quiz or a test or just a really trying time in school for me, I always pray to God. I always pray, and I ask him, I'm like, please, God, this is not for me. This is for your glory. Please help give me the strength that I need to carry this through. And that is by far the biggest thing. Another thing I always say, it's one of my biggest philosophies, is do your best and God will do the rest. You know,
Amen.
God always commands us to do our best in everything. And that's exactly what I strive to do every time. But then there's the part where I can't control. And that's when the prayer comes in, and I always ask him, I'm like, you know, God, I've done my part. And I know that everything will go through as you see fit. And I always encourage that to my friends too. And I always pray for them, and I pray for the same things for them that I do for myself. And they always do feel a lot more at peace and a lot more, less stressed and just more motivation. Because as you said before, motivation is a huge struggle. A lot of kids do get burnt out very quickly with all of the things going on simultaneously.
Yeah. And I think it's not that idea. And I like what you said about praying, but it's not God, I haven't studied for any of this. Please help me to pass. It's like, no, and I think that's actually a microcosm of the actual thing, is like Colossians 3:17, do everything, for God's glory as if you're working for him. And so what's cool is God actually created us to work. Right. Work is not a consequence of sin, because God created Adam and Eve to tend the garden before sin entered the world. And so we were created to learn. We were created to work, but we were created to do those things for the glory of God. And so when we realize, like, okay, God, what do you want from me? Not what is the world telling me I need to do? Then you can kind of step back and say, okay, God's in control. And I also think, and I have to be careful how I say this, right? If you are not doing your work, that's not honoring to God, right? But at the same time, I will say, I've never once looked back on my high school or middle school, right? And I did well in school. I've never once looked back and said, I wish I would have taken more APs, or I wish I would have spent more time studying. I always look back and say, I wish I would have shared the message of Christ more. I wish I would have lived for him more, and I wish I would have done the things I enjoyed more. Because I look back and I say, it was good, I learned a lesson, but I kind of wasn't really where God wanted me, because I felt pressure. And I think a lot of kids too around here, especially, it's like they take all the advanced classes, because it's almost like you take the advanced class or you take the normal class, and the normal class doesn't challenge you. And so you kind of have to choose between, am I going to be over challenged or under challenged, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to find that niche. And so, but that's what I would say is, hey, just do your best, but don't let it consume you.
Right, exactly.
And it's hard not to, because it's what you spend most of your time doing, even, 7 hours a day, it's like 5 days a week. And so it can be tough, because you're not choosing to be there always. Even if you're homeschooled or private school, you're not always choosing to do what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
But we need to understand that, like, okay, God, I'm going to do this for you. Even if I don't love it, even if it's not my thing, I'm going to try my best. I'm not just going to say, well, this isn't for me, so I'm just not going to try.
Exactly.
That's not what God has for us. God says, no. Just as you said, my parents always told me, hey, we're not going to love you based on your GPA, but we are going to expect you to do your best. And I think that's what God says to us. He's like, look, all I expect is that you do your best. You do your best to live for me. I'm in control. Even if you don't, I still love you, but you're going to miss out on some of the things I have for you if you don't work hard, if you aren't living for me. And so I think at the end of the day, it's just praying, just saying, God, where have you gifted me? What have you gifted me? And if I'm not a reader, then don't take, AP language. Don't take AP literature. If science is not for me, I don't want to go into the medical field, don't take AP bio or AP chemistry, And if people pressure you, just say, hey, look, I just don't feel like that's what God has gifted me in.
Right.
But he has gifted everybody in something.
Mhm.
And that's what our job is to do, is to keep trying to keep working hard until we find where God wants us. And I think that's the biggest thing. So
Exactly.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing your story. Any lasting advice, any lasting points you'd like to say to somebody who's watching, listening, things you'd want them to know?
Of course. So, to anyone who's watching and might feel burnt out, stressed, or just with no motivation at school, I encourage you, just pray about it. God always wants to hear from you. He wants to help you with whatever you're going through, and you're gonna do great no matter what. God will see you through it to the end, and He always looks out for those who follow Him and believe in Him. Don't worry, you've got this. You'll do great in anything.
Lauren, I think God might have gifted you for something in speaking, by the way. Just that one's just free, but no, I really appreciate your heart. Really appreciate you sharing. I appreciate you guys watching. Again, you might be at a place like Lauren where it's easy to get stressed about it, but God's in control. Do your best, and He's looking after you. If you're at a point where you're struggling with motivation, realize that God has created you for something unique, and so just keep doing your best and trying hard until you find where God has for you, because He'll continue to show you day by day, but He doesn't always give us the big picture ahead of time. So, as we continue to look at this idea of God creating us uniquely and for a purpose and for a reason, that goes back to the big story that all of this is all about, which is just that God created us for a purpose.
Yeah.
He created us in His image, but we messed up. We messed up, and because of that, God is perfect. We are not, and so we're separated from Him. And so the only way we can have a relationship with Him is by coming to that point where we come to the end of ourselves and say, God, I believe You're enough. I believe You failed, or You succeeded where we have failed, and You paid the penalty for me, the ultimate penalty, which is death on the cross, and You rose on the third day. God, because You live, I want to live too. God, I give my life to You. And that's what it's all about. That's what it all comes back to. Your grades don't define you. Your popularity doesn't define you. Your friends don't define you. You don't define you. God defines you because He loves you enough, and He created you for a purpose and for a reason. And so keep working hard until He shows you what that is. So I appreciate you guys watching today. If this was of encouragement to you, like, share, subscribe, send it to a friend. But as we continue just to encourage, train, and equip you to share the message of hope, we pray that you would do just that if what God has done in your life, that you would share that with others. And we thank you so much for joining in for today's episode, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
All right. See you guys.